Hello, and welcome to my review of the Sig Sauer Buckmaster 3-9 by 50. Got the big boy here this time, rifle scope. Now this scope I found used at a local pawn shop, and it came exactly as you see it. So I do not have the box, I do not have the manuals. All I have is the scope caps that were on it, and the scope itself. So before we go too far, I am going to get out the notes that I took off of Sig's website and give you some details about the physical specs that this scope has. As stated, 3-9 power, magnification, 50mm objective lens. This one is the Illuminated one, which I was actually not looking for. I wasn't even looking for the 50mm lens. I was trying to find a 3-9 by 40, but when I saw this in the pawn shop for 80 bucks, kind of tough to walk past when I was looking for this scope generally. The weight, 15.8 ounces. The length was actually not on their website for whatever reason, but we'll just go ahead and measure it. We're looking at 12 1/4. So 12.25. Go ahead and make a note. 12 1/4 inches of overall length. Our eye relief, they stated that it is actually adjust or variable. At the low power 3x, we are seeing 3.85 inches, and at the high power, we're seeing 4.17 inches of eye relief. So just a little bit of difference in that eye relief. I already used this a little bit, and I actually did not notice a change in the eye relief, so I suspect that I was probably right in that 4-inch eye relief range, which is going to make this an interesting option for those people who like calibers like 270 and 30-06, because that is going to give you a fair bit of eye relief to keep yourself from getting the old scope ring kiss in the eye. So that's an important detail to remember. Tube diameter, 1 inch. Our field of view at 100 yards is going to be 34 feet at the bottom end at 3x and 11.3 feet at 9x, which is a little bit smaller than I would have expected with the 50mm lens, but that is the number that Sig Sauer quotes. Our turrets are going to have 1/4 MOA click click adjustments, and our total adjustment per revolution, one full 360 degrees of rotation, is going to get us 15 MOA, and we're going to see all of that when I get this thing mounted on my fixture and take a closer look at the turrets. And our maximum range of movement for both the elevation and the windage is going to be 60 MOA. So if you were centered up mechanically in the tube, you would have 30 MOA of adjustment up, down, left, and right. And if you haven't seen the other review of the Vortex Crossfire that I already completed, the purpose of this review is actually to take a look at some of the more budget-friendly options that exist in the market, and I just wanted to show a little love for the bottom end of the price range, and for those people who are attempting to hunt on a smaller budget. Lots of people buy inexpensive rifles, things like the Savage Axis series or the Ruger American series, especially the first gen. The second gen has gone up in price considerably. But all of those used scopes that you might find, or used rifles that you might find in a pawn shop or your local gun store that don't have a piece of glass on top of them, are going to need one. And sometimes you just don't have $3, $4, $5 or more $100 to throw a scope on something, and you need to know where the value is. You don't want to go spend money on something, even if it's inexpensive, and have it turn out to be a piece of junk. So I am going to be doing a short series, I think 4 scopes at this point, that are going to cover that kind of low end of the range as far as budget, but I'm also focusing on ones that you can go to your local sporting goods store and find on the shelf. Now I suggest trying to find a used one, because you can save you more money, but if you don't have the time, or you just don't want to deal with it and you need something that you can go find at the sporting goods store, I wanted to do a review of at least a few of those that I know are pretty much able to be found everywhere. And that's this is one of those. Maybe not the Illuminated 50mm one, but the 3 to 9 by 40mm version of this without the illumination. I see that thing everywhere. So with that said, we're gonna move on. We're gonna start at the back here. We're gonna first take a look at our adjustable eyepiece. There it is, bottomed out. I'm gonna go ahead and crank it all the way out. That's rather generous. Nicely damped, actually. That thing's consistent. There's just a little bit of noise in there where it's kind of scraping those threads against each other. It's a little more noise than I'm used to hearing, but the resistance was nice and consistent, and the knurling that's on here gives you plenty to grab onto. I actually like how wide this is. I don't have a huge love for the ones that are real skinny that you can barely get your fingers on, especially when you have gloves on. I like this fact that that's wide. But anyway, I digress. All the way out, I'm gonna go in about a half. There's actually a fair, yeah, that's not great. It's not a huge amount, but it's definitely noticeable. If you had that thing out all the way, that could present some problems, because what will happen is if you take a shot, you see where you hit, and if this thing has moved a little bit or you bump it, and that is going to change a little bit of your line of sight through the scope, which could affect where you think you're aimed, and you're not actually aimed where you think you are. And then you're going to make adjustments off of a bad aim. But when you get down in there further, see, now it's almost all gone. There's still a little bit, but not to the degree that it would be a problem. So if you know that you're the type of person who has, bad eyesight and you need to crank this thing way out to get it corrected for your vision, that's something to look at. That's definitely something you want to be aware of, because you don't want to have that thing get bumped, especially after you've zeroed the rifle, and then have it get bumped out of position and not be aiming where you think you are. One thing you can do, and I've done before, is the old put a piece of tape around here, not electrical tape, but I would do like hockey stick tape or grip tape, like you might put on like a weight bar or bike handles, and then you just you crank it out further than it needs to be, put maybe one full wrap or maybe 2 wraps around there, and you just crank that thing down there, and it will jam that tape into the body there and prevent that thing from being able to move. It's not ideal. It's not what I would want to have to do, though I have done it before. But that is the solution for these eyepieces that have too much play in them. Anyway, let's move forward. One thing this does have that I wish more scopes would do is the integrated throw lever. That makes that so easy. One finger, that's pretty smooth. There is, I don't know if you'll hear that, but there's just a little bit of drag right there, and then it goes away. Right there at 3, get to about 5, and then it goes away. The resistance is about the same, but you can just feel it in your finger. So we have 3. Let's check. So that's just short of 9 o'clock. And then we're going to go over here to 3 o'clock. So almost exactly 180 degrees. What I don't like about the maximum being on this side is that there's a chance when you run your bolt, you're going to hit that thing. Maybe not with the handle, but with your fingers. Yeah. I wish that this was low on this side, maximum on that side, because if you're over here on the low end and you take a snapshot, I mean, you could still have the same potential problem, but I prefer when I'm up on the maximum for this to be out of the way. Maybe you're the other way around. You might like it that it's on that side at the low end, because if you're taking those quick shots, maybe you don't want that in the way. So anyway, it does come over. It could potentially interfere with your bolt handle the way it is. Now, if that's the case, what you can do is just turn that bad boy out of there and not use it. This ring is not so tight that you would not be able to get your thumb on that little guy right there. Perhaps on a bolt come that, maybe the preferable way to run that is just to take that stud out of there. you could probably take that down to the hardware store and figure out what thread that is and get a shorter, just a little screw. Give yourself a little bit more elevation there and not use that at all. Personally, that is quite a small piece of threading. I wouldn't be particularly surprised if you hit that up against a tree or a tree stand and knock that bad boy off completely, or at least bend it. It does tighten in there pretty good. I haven't had an issue with it coming loose, but if I was going to use this all the time, I would probably put a dab of blue Loctite on there just to make sure that it wouldn't walk out. But that's my preference. I like to blue Loctite basically everything, just because I've had too many times where stuff has come loose on me. But we'll move forward and we'll look at this. All of these marks are the results of buying a pawn shop optic. You know, you're going to get stuff that's going to have been used before. Nothing you can do about it. So we're going to ignore those marks and look at the rest of the finish overall. And I have to say that it is pretty good. There's maybe just a little bit of difference between this and the front. When they put those together, those might be independent pieces, anodized separately. I can just see a slight difference, and it's not dramatic, but it is there. Same thing with like the text down here and the color of the text up there. It's just a little different. Some of that might be, you know, just general wear. I don't know how old this scope is, but I am seeing just a slight difference in the overall colors of the anodizing between individual pieces. But on all of them, it is complete. I'm not seeing any light spots or thin spots where you can see the aluminum through the anodizing a little bit. It's all got a good cover, so that's good. What we want to do now is we're going to spin around over here and look at our illumination dial. And the first thing that I noticed when I saw this, which I was unaware of prior to seeing the scope the first time, is that it comes with off positions in between each of the illumination settings. And when I saw that and I thought about the MSR 1 to 6, my first thought was like, why did they not do that for that one? That's just me nitpicking and obsessing over little details. I like the fact that those are in between, because if you know that you're going to be hunting in low light and you can put this thing down here between 2 and 3, and no matter which way you go, it's going to be the right brightness or close enough. That's just one of those little, you know, quality features that I really appreciate. Whereas if you were up here and you went the wrong way and you know, blind yourself temporarily with that maximum brightness in low light, that's a bummer. Whereas if you were in bright daylight and this thing is daylight bright, which we will see, and you hit that 1x, you know, then you're like, dang it, and you gotta go back the other way. But either way, I'll let you hear that. Good detents. Those are nice and positive. One thing I am feeling though is this turret appears to have a little bit of play in it. It sure does. Not up and down, but front to back. I don't know if you guys can see that. Whatever that slot is that it fits into, and hopefully there's an O-ring there. I hate to think that that was not weather tight where your electronics are. There's just a little bit of play in that illumination dial. That's interesting. Oh well, you know, we're going to continue. I'm going to pop this open. I suspect that these reviews are going to be interesting for me because you really see what the manufacturers are capable when they're working on a very tight budget or very tight price range. We have our 6-finger contact in there, and we have the 2032 battery and our 3 dimple circuit board. All pretty standard stuff. You know, industry has been using those for a long time. They work, they're effective. There's nothing to complain about there. We do have an O-ring on our cap, so that's good. It's going to help keep it watertight. I'm going to pop that out there again. Don't see any other O-rings in there. It's the whole turret that's moving. Okay, interesting. We'll see if that becomes an issue. I am going to do, not in this review, but in a subsequent comparison review between these and the other 3 budget scopes I have already in my possession. I'm going to do a little bit of weather testing I'm going to do a little bit of drop testing. Nothing aggressive. I'm not trying to break them. I just want to see if they will withstand the sort of basic environmental stuff and where rough use that they're probably going to see in their lifetime, especially if they things like falling off the back of a truck or getting dropped from waist high, that sort of thing that happens to these sorts of scopes and expensive scopes all the time. So moving to the top, we're going to pull this off real quick, take a look at our turret. We do see our 15 MOA. We have counterclockwise for up, and we have our markings for the quarter MOA per adjustment, and that little screw there allows us to pop this turret off and reset our 0, which is actually a nice little touch, because if you need to make a small adjustment, it's nice to have a starting point of 0 as opposed to just 11 MOA or something wherever you had to set it for 0. But we're going to take a closer look at that when we go and look at the turrets. There is an O-ring there, so that's going to help us keep the elements out, and that is a metal cap, aluminum, which I appreciate as opposed to plastic ones, because I have broken my share of plastic scope caps. Even if you don't break them completely, you tighten them too much and they split, then they're basically useless. On our windage side, same thing. So it's marked for left and right. Not marked left and right, but it's marked to give you indication whether you're going left or right, because it goes 1, 2, 3, 4 in both directions, around to 7 at the back. Same basic turret, same basic dial. Right for counterclockwise in this case, and our quarter MOA click adjustment indicated on there as well. And the caps are the same, they're interchangeable. And again, nice O-ring seal on the bottom. Assembled in China, no surprise there. Designed in Oregon, that's their little marketing bit. It's a Chinese made scope. But anyway, the front we have our 50mm lens with this a little styling going on there instead of just being smooth. Maybe that, no, it does not engage the cap in any way. Just there for aesthetics. We're going to go ahead and pop those back on. Take a quick look at those since we have them and they're intended to be left on. Let's see. They do fold all the way to the back. That's nice. They don't stop halfway and they both do the same. So that's cool. Actually on there pretty good. If they were too loose for your liking, again, you can throw a little piece of tape on there and take up some of that space and then really wedge them on so they wouldn't fall off. Not a lot of resistance there though. That will almost certainly pop open the first time you catch it on your coat or anything else. Same way with that one. They snap shut, but there's not much resistance holding them shut. But it does come with them. If you don't like them, you can pull them off. But they will help keep your scope lenses safe while the thing is in transport. But I think we have looked at this enough, and I will go ahead and get it mounted up in my fixture so that we can look at the reticle and the turrets in more detail. So now I have us set to take a look through this Buckmaster scope, and the first thing I'm going to talk about is the amount of the bezel that we are seeing around our image. It is obvious that there's quite a bit. It doesn't seem as apparent with the naked eye just because you have your entire field of view of your natural vision, but it is definitely a large, heavy black circle. Fortunately, it is consistent, and whether you have your eye placement perfect or maybe a little bit back, just depending on your shooting situation, it seems to stay pretty stable. That being said, we'll go ahead and talk about our reticle, which Sig Sauer refers to as the Buckmaster BDC Reticle. It is an MOA based reticle, and for all intents and purposes, it is mostly just a duplex reticle with a few wind drops to give you some idea of where you might need to hold if you are shooting at extended distances. Now, those individual drops are not equally spaced, and the first one is going to be at 1.5 MOA. The second one is at 3.75 MOA. The third one is at 6.5 MOA, and the fourth one is at 9.5 MOA. I wasn't able to find what the distance is between the center of the crosshair and the steps where the stadia lines go up to their heavier line. I don't know what that measurement is because I couldn't find it, and I don't have the manual to refer to, but the one that I looked at online did not give that number. So if you're trying to use that top of that 6 o'clock stadia as a hold, you're just going to have to do it based on experience and practice and see where it's at. It might be in certain apps like Strelic or something like that, but I don't know. Other than that, it's a fairly simple reticle. We have a nice fine center crosshair, so you're going to be able to put a precise 0 on this thing when you're using it at the range, and then you have those heavier lines that are going to help keep your attention focused in the center for those kind of quicker shots if you're doing some brush hunting. But I'm going to go ahead and go from our 3 where we're sitting now, and go ahead and crank it on up here to the 9 power. And we do see just a slight drop in brightness there. It's not aggressive, and in broad daylight it is also even less obvious than that. But if you are hunting in those twilight hours, you may notice a difference in that, and you might not want to use that full magnification if you are limited on the natural light. But I'm going to go ahead and crank it back down here to the 3, and we're going to go ahead and run through the illumination before we move on. So right now we are sitting in the off position between the 5 and 6, just because that's where I was using it the other day. But we're going to start at, that is our maximum brightness, which is clearly visible against the background. And spoiler alert, when we get out there in the field, it will also be daylight bright out there in broad daylight. That's 5. And then we have our off position in between each brightness level. There's 4, 3, 2, and 1. You can probably hear those individual detents as I click through them. They are very tactile. But anyway, go back to 6, nice and bright. Blooming out a little bit. It will do that to the naked eye too. It is actually quite bright. And that, I think, covers the reticle, and we will go ahead and take a look at our turrets. So now we're set up to go ahead and take a look at our elevation turret. I have the cap removed already, and we can see that right here there is a little reference mark. You can see it better if the ring wasn't in place or if you're just looking at it from a better angle. But that is to sort of give you an idea of where your reset will be for 0. We also have a nice O-ring right here where the cap is going to bottom out and keep our turret weather tight. But I'm going to go ahead and give this a little spin so y'all can see it and hear it. There you go. So we have 15 MOA of adjustment per rotation, and we have our nice quarter MOA individual click adjustments. And I will say that for a fairly inexpensive scope, it does have pretty tactile individual detents for those clicks, and they are audible, though ironically, they're quieter in one direction than the other. So I'm just curious what the shape of those detents actually is that it's causing the counterclock or the clockwise rotation to be audibly louder. But whatever, it is what it is. Go ahead and get that back on 0, and I will show you how we remove this little screw up here, which is 2 millimeters, or uses a 2mm key. And it is a small steel screw. I would appreciate it if it was a slightly larger cap on that screw, but it is sufficient for this task. I'll try to get this where you guys can see it without dropping this little guy. There she is. Pretty fine threads. Stainless steel screw, which is nice so that it won't rust. Prefer that to like a phosphate coated carbon steel screw. It's just a nice little extra. And then underneath there we have our brass erector. And on our cap it says up, and it gives us the counterclockwise rotation for up, and it tells us that it is 1/4 MOA per click. And then on the inside of the cap we have the corresponding splines that match up with the erector. This is definitely an aluminum cap. It's not made out of plastic, so that's also very nice. I don't see any additional O-rings in there. I wouldn't be surprised if there are some O-rings and some grease underneath that to help with the weather tightness, because you may need to make adjustments when the weather is not ideal. Let me get this set back on here as close to 0 as I can, though these little hash marks don't, well, that might be 1/4 MOA off. Let me try one more. Yeah, I think that's the right one. They're not perfect. In an ideal world, this line would be up here on the drum, or maybe there would be some revolution counters so that you could know if you had gone a full rotation in one direction or the other. But all of those are, you know, the sorts of extras that you're probably not going to see in a scope that retails for under $150. So I am more than confident that this is going to do what it needs to do on the range. So we're going to go ahead, put our little cap back on, also aluminum, with some decent threads, and move on to our windage turret and take a quick look at that. And that does bottom out nicely on that O-ring. But anyway, let's move on. So now I have a setup on the right side of the scope to take a look at our windage turret, and it is going to be very similar to what we saw with the elevation turret, with the slight difference of it being marked 1 and 2 in either direction. It doesn't just go from 0 around to 15. It is going to be marked for left and right rotation, though it doesn't actually say left or right. But I suppose if you know which way you're going and you just need to do, you know, maybe less than 7 MOA of correction, at least you'll be able to count and get an idea of which way you got to go. But I'm going to go ahead and be quiet now and give this a good spin so you all can hear it, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more. I think I got that back to 0. Obviously this little line here, and trying to reference these little lines here, is going to be difficult because of the distance between them, but you know, it's better than nothing. More likely you're going to be just counting your clicks and moving into whatever direction you need to. This scope is marked for MOA in 1/4 MOA increments, and we have a nice big dash, little dash, and then the number, so it does make it kind of easy to know what you're doing. It would just be nice if that line was up here, either on the threads or on that barrel, so you could actually see it a little more clearly. But the turret does appear to be metal. It does have nice knurling up here. It definitely gives you enough to get a hold of when you're making those adjustments. And the detents on the adjustments are pretty sharp. And they're not $1,000 target turrets, but for a sub $200 scope, they're actually pretty decent, and they have a nice sound to them. So you're going to be able to feel them, and you're definitely going to be able to hear them if you got your cheek, you know, rested on the rifle. It's going to transmit through that rifle and right to your ear. What I do like about it is it has a screw, just like our elevation turret, that allows us to remove the cap. And I'm going to be careful not to drop that little screw because it is tiny. And you can see that it is marked for the direction of right and not left. But we have our 1 click equals 1/4 MOA. Just a little bit of information. There is a brass erector in there with some threads on it, or some splines on it. And our cap has the corresponding splines cut into the inside of it. Carefully dump that screw out. Get this line back up as best I can. I think that's probably going to be as close as I'm going to get it. Take my little screw, which is using a 2mm hex key or Allen key, whatever you would like to call it. And it is a steel screw into that brass body, so we always want to be careful not to over torque that or cross thread it. Then once it's back on there, you're able to do your adjustments as needed. Other than that, there's not a whole lot more to say. I think we will go ahead and get this cap put back on, which is also aluminum, and take ourselves outside and start looking at some stuff. There is also a very nice washer right there that cap is going to bottom out against and keep everything nice and tight and waterproof. Alright, let's go on to the next thing. I have a setup out here to take a look at our eye chart, currently at a distance of 50 yards, and the scope is at 3 power magnification. Go ahead and zoom that up. That's about 6. Fix that brightness a little bit, and you can see how our image is already starting to get a little fuzzy. And then as we reach our maximum, we definitely have a less than ideal image as far as sharpness goes on our target. And that is because of our fixed parallax, which requires us to choose between the reticle and our target at anything other than the 100 yards that the parallax is set for. But I am going to make a small adjustment and bring that target into focus for us so that we can see what this scope will actually do. There we go. And you see how our illumination there on our crosshair kind of bloomed out a little bit, and the overall lines have become a little blurry as we now are focused on our eye chart. Which at 50 yards we were able to make out quite a bit of detail. And there is a little bit of color mismatch on those black letters, but that is partially to do with the nature of the setting sun today. It is not quite as white a light as we might have had earlier in the day, and that is just what we're going to have to deal with. But as far as detail, our color representation over there on our color charts, still good. It does match what I see with my naked eye when I look through the scope, even with the slightly yellow tint to the light, as with the white sheets of paper that should be pure white, they are also slightly yellow tinged. But on our playing cards, we are able to make out quite a bit of detail on those individual cards. Definitely able to see the jokers for jokers, and the ace of spades as the ace of spades, as well as our 2, 3, and number 4 cards. And I really don't have any complaints about this image. I'm going to pan down here just a little bit, try to catch some of the remaining glare off of this car, see how our coatings are doing as far as controlling that flaring. And I'd say they're doing pretty good, because there should be more star bursting going on than you see there through the scope. I definitely see more with my naked eye than I am seeing on here. What I want to do now is pan over to our building to our left. We're going to go across it. It is much darker, so I will go ahead and turn on our illumination so we can see it against the darker brown paint of our building. And we do see a little bit of fisheye on those vertical slats. We pan across them. Not terrible. We're still getting a decent amount of sharpness, even though our distance has decreased significantly. go ahead and fix that. And what you'll notice is how that reticle has become even more blurry as the disparity between our distance and our parallax has increased. The distance of these letters right now is going to be at approximately 25 yards. And while the blurriness of that reticle is a little bit exaggerated here on camera, it's not by much. You might see just a little bit more detail in that with your naked eye, depending on your vision. But there is a definite blurring of the crosshair when you're trying to focus on something that is at 1/4 of the distance of the parallax. As we'll see later, the difference in distance versus parallax is actually less dramatic as we get beyond 100 yards than it is when we are under 100 yards. But what we can see here is that even in this low light area where it's shaded behind some trees, still able to make out quite a bit of detail in the woodwork and in the paint filling those letters. But I will go ahead and pan us back over to our car and our eye chart. Once I have zoomed back out to 3 power, I'm going to adjust our focus again just to try to get as good an image as possible. There we go. You'll see that the depth of field is far more forgiving here at the low end of the magnification range, but that's just because we're asking a lot less of the glass. But overall, I'm pretty happy with this image, its relative lack of chromatic aberration, and the way that it's controlling the glare off of those bright areas of the vehicle. But from here, we're going to go ahead and move out to 100 yards and take a look at it at that distance. So now I have us repositioned to do the eye chart at 100 yards, and we're going to start out here at 3 power. If I can quit banging into things. We will go ahead and put it on our maximum brightness of 6. Go ahead and zoom in. Obviously the white sheets of paper with the sun shining on them are a worst case scenario for testing our brightness, but even at that we can see that fine red dot in the middle of our reticle. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off for now. Right there, and we're going to take a look and see just how much detail we're able to pull out of that. Get that brightness turned down just a hair so that we're getting as realistic an image as possible. Just fiddle with a few things here while we look at it. I see we have a good deal of clarity on there. Our color representation on the color samples there on the right side looks good. The chicken, while further away now, is still surprised, and we can make out the first line of our numbers and the first line of our letters without any trouble. You'll have to determine if you can see those bullet holes from the 6.5 Creedmoor rounds up there on the bullseyes. They're a little too small on my screen for me to make that determination for you. Similarly, the elements of those playing cards is about half the size it was a minute ago at 50 yards, and going to be lacking in as much detail as we were able to make out at that distance. But overall, I have a very nice image. The sun reflecting off of the arches of the wheel wells and off of the silver wheels themselves. The glare is actually less than I see with my naked eye, so that's good. Those coatings are doing their job to try to control that glare and the flaring off of those fenders. I am going to pan just a little bit over here to where it is a little more shady on the truck. And then I am going to turn our illumination on to a 5. Off, and then a 4 is even still visible. So I think we can confidently say that this reticle is daylight bright, which is a nice little bonus. But we don't need to spend a whole bunch of time here. I am going to pan us back across and look at some of the foliage behind my pilot, just to kind of give you an idea. That tree that we're looking at right there, right in the middle, is going to be at about 150 yards. So still able to make out quite a nice little image. plenty of detail in those trees. And if you were using this for sort of a maximum point blank sort of shooting, you would still be able to easily make out those targets and use your reticle. Whereas those yellow flowers over there are going to be at about 160 yards. So plenty of detail for regular hunting distances where you're going to set your 0 to 100 or maybe 200 yards and just aim center mass for your shots. Fortunately, this reticle does not give us any windage help, but at 100 yards or even 150 yards, you're probably not going to need it unless it is extremely windy. But with that, I think we'll go ahead and box it up here and take it out to the floodplain and see how this thing performs at longer distances. Now I have it set up out here in the floodplain to take a look at our regulation signs and then a couple of buildings. We are going to start at the 3 power and go ahead and get zoomed in. Right there we're looking at 6 power, and finally up here at 9. Now while those signs do not appear very legible, part of that is due to the overall brightness of the sun shining off of them, but we can make out the individual papers and see that there are words written on them. And what I am actually kind of impressed with is the fact that though this scope does not have an adjustable parallax, the quality of the image there at the center of our field of view is actually pretty good. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn on our illumination. That is at 5. And you can see that we can just make it out over the white of the paper. But if I adjust this up ever so slightly, get that a little bit darker background. Don't want to go crazy here. You can see how that illumination is going to help you in instances where you're in a bright daylight, but maybe you have a dark background that you are looking into and you need to be able to find the center of your crosshair. And before we move on from this, I do want to point out the general lack of chromatic aberration. There is some. It's not a perfect image, but really it's not bad. To kind of give some other extra context, I'm going to move over here and look at these 3 trucks. Start with this red and this black one. And where we will see a little bit of difference in our depth of field because of that fixed parallax, I am going to change the focus ever so slightly to favor that red truck that has some logos on the side of it. So just give me a second. Now you can see how the details on those trucks has improved quite a bit, but our illumination dot has bloomed out and our reticle itself is a little bit fuzzy. It's not so fuzzy that we can't still make out those individual hash lines and the difference in the thinner center part of the reticle and the heavier stadia lines out there towards the edge. So even if you were trying to take a shot at that distance and you had to choose to focus your eyesight on your target, this reticle is still going to provide you with enough clarity of your reticle itself that you could make those shots and use those BDC holds. And when we're focused out there at 310 yards on that truck, we see that our depth of field there in the grass in front of us, or at the bottom of our field of view, which is going to be at around 175 yards. Yeah, 165, excuse me. And that green grass down at the bottom. And the trees behind the truck at 330 yards. All of that's looking pretty good. So our functional depth of field is actually decent, except where it's limited by our fixed parallax. And I'm going to pan just a little bit more to our right. And we're going to get a look at this silver truck and its white trailer. And the one thing I want to point out on this one is where the sun is reflecting off of the B pillar just behind, or I guess that's technically maybe a C pillar behind the passenger rear door. We are getting a fair bit of glare and star bursting off of that. So maybe our coatings on this lens aren't quite up to the task of controlling that glare. But overall, the image does look very nice. And I am going to go ahead and move us back to focus on our reticle and then take us to our first building. Now that I have that set, I'm going to go ahead and crank this magnification back down. We're going to quickly pan over here to our first building. I'm going to settle on these power transformers up here because they are what I'm actually most interested in looking at, because they represent essentially a torso sized target. We're going to go up from 3 power, go ahead and get zoomed into 9. And as before with the regulation signs, we can see that the image is a little soft, it is a little bit blurry, where that brick building should have nice sharp brick lines. We are getting kind of a fuzzy looking brick building. What I'm going to do now is again change our focus to be biased towards our target so that we can see just what the absolute maximum clarity of this lens is. Alright, I have that readjusted, and we can see that our red illumination has once again bloomed a little bit, so I'm going to turn that off. We're also able to now make out quite a bit more detail on our building in our brick lines. I'm going to go ahead and move off center of this a little bit, look at this building. But now that we have it focused there, we can see those red 75 sticker down at the bottom a little bit more clearly. You'll have to be the judge of whether or not that's legible because it is too small on my screen. But when we get down here to our building, we once again see our fuzzy reticle, but we have quite a bit more sharpness and still a relative lack of chromatic aberration, even in the shadowed areas underneath the building and on the higher contrast transformers and the edge of the brick building against the trees in the background. We also, unlike where we saw a fairly aggressive amount of glare coming off of the truck, the glare coming off of that stainless steel pipe is a little bit less aggressive. But anyway, I think that gives us a good idea of what we're seeing here at about 325 yards. We'll go ahead and step it out to the maximum 550 yards of our last building. And here we are. I'm going to start with the building this time, and then we'll move to the transformers once we're zoomed in. And the image at this distance is ever so slightly more blurry than it was at 325. And just to confirm that range, I know I said 550, but let's make sure. 558. I am going to adjust this focus back to favor the building, and we'll see what difference that makes in our reticle sharpness now that we have an extra 200 yards to deal with. So there we have it. Now I have us focused on the building, which is giving us a fairly good image. You can see just barely making out those grout lines with that 9x magnification, and we can see our individual transformers and those insulators on the top of them, and even the wood grain on that 325 yard tower is discernible, even if it's not in a tremendous amount of detail. You can also see some of the power lines crisscrossing there above our center of our field of view. But our reticle has become significantly blurrier than it was at the 325 yard range, just because we're having to make up for that additional difference in parallax versus the distance of our target. And in this situation, if you did not have a particularly well contrasted target to be shooting at, those hash marks might prove to be a little too fuzzy against a low contrast or similarly colored background, because we wouldn't be able to depend on our illumination, which at this distance would be considerably above our point of aim for our target, which I'm going to demonstrate by moving this over to our transformer. And we would be using approximately that third hash mark, which, while it is still reasonably well contrasted against that light gray transformer, you can see that that hash mark is not particularly obvious. And that is going to be the case with this scope. And so what you would need to do is maybe identify your target and hope that it doesn't move, and then focus on your reticle while you're taking your shot. Because now you can see with the focus on our reticle, that line is nice and crisp. It doesn't obscure a lot of that target. While it doesn't give you any indication or assistance for wind, it is at least going to give you some idea of where you should be holding in elevation. But all of that is going to be determined by your individual load, and you're going to have to go out and do that research and make those calculations for yourself. But what I'm going to do now is leave the focus where it's at, turn our brightness back on to maximum, and we're going to pan back across to where we began and have a look at some of these power poles and see what our fisheye looks like. Honestly, it's looking pretty good on that first one. Same is true of that one. This one's really going to be the tell because it's a little closer. It's going to take up more of our field of view top to bottom. Really, I'm not seeing any fisheye there to complain about. Maybe just a little bit in that one as we get close. Yeah, it does bend a little bit towards the extreme ends. So did that one. Not totally straight. But as we get back down here to our area regulation signs, I have to say that I'm pretty pleased. Given the price point, I think this scope has performed admirably, and I don't really have any serious complaints. And with that, I think we will go ahead and take it back to the bench and wrap this video up. So we are back here at the bench to wrap up this review, and I have some notes so that I do not get off track. I know this review has already drifted into the 50+ minute range. So what I am going to do is start with the pros, which the first on my list is going to be that daylight bright illumination and the fact that it has the off positions on the dial to be able to position it closer to where you expect that you're going to be able to needing to use it at, which I always appreciate that. It's something that budget optics have liked for quite a while. My second thing is just the general sharpness of the image, the edge-to-edge clarity that we were seeing. There was a little bit less, a little bit more chromatic aberration than something like the Buckmaster or the Crossfire had, but on the whole, I think this had a very nice image, especially given its price point. We were obviously limited by the parallax, but that's just going to be the case with all of these cheap 3x9s that I'm looking at. You're going to have to, do that dance with your eyeball between focusing on the reticle and focusing on your target when you're not at 100 yards. I was also reasonably pleased with the turrets on this thing. I mean, they're not tactical grade, dialing type turrets, but just being able to confidently feel those individual clicks and, to be able to make those adjustments and not feel like they're kind of mushy, it's just going to give you a better sense of what you're doing when you're trying to get this thing dialed in. And then my last major pro that I have for this is Sig's warranty, which they have recently updated to include the electronics so that this thing is covered for life, no matter who owns it, whether you're the first owner or the fifth owner or whatever. You don't need a warranty card or anything like that. You just have to have your serial number on the bottom and file that online with them. And I haven't had to use it yet, but I'm told that their warranty is actually quite good. And then we're going to go to the cons. My first con is just going to be a couple of the little construction issues. The looseness of this eyepiece when it was really turned all the way out or nearly all the way out had more play in it than I would really like to see. Obviously, zero play would be ideal, but that's tough to achieve on these cheaper optics. but this one had kind of a bit more than I'm really comfortable with. There are remedies for that, none of which are ideal. It'd be better if it just had a better tight fit inside of its body. Some of that, including the looseness that we found in the Illumination dial where it shifts back and forth. Some of those things might just be that this is a used scope. I don't know how old it is or how used it was. So some of these things may have just gotten loose through repeated use. I don't know. This is what I have to deal with. And if it is an issue of just use, then you're going to probably be able to expect the same thing from yours, because it will also be used at some point. What else? I think those are really my two big cons, was just the construction issues. So I'm going to go on to who do I think this is for. With the daylight brighted illumination and the simple reticle that's in this thing, I think people who are like hunting in close quarters, like in the thicker bits of the woods, or if you're just places where you're never going to be taking things past maybe like a 50-yard shot, and you're going to be down towards the end or the bottom end of your magnification range a lot of the time because you're trying to preserve your field of view, I think this one is going to do pretty well. Also because of that larger objective lens when you're under canopy, or just in areas where there's less light because you don't have big open fields, the extra light gathering ability of that 50mm lens is going to help you out there too. Of course, anybody looking for just a budget scope to put on a budget rifle that's got a lifetime warranty, daylight bright illumination. If you enjoy the throw lever, it's got that. If you don't, you can just take it off. I think it's just a pretty versatile scope. I wish that the reticle had some accommodation for wind. It gives you that little bit for elevation, and then just kind of leaves you hanging as far as wind calls are going to be concerned. So you got to balance that. If you are hunting somewhere where it's windy, this reticle may not be ideal for you, especially if you're going to be doing 250, maybe 300-yard shots. You might look for something that's going to give you a little bit more assistance on that wind, because this one's basically giving you nothing. And then for those semi-automatic MSR, varmint guns, again, that daylight bright illumination, which is also dim enough for those low light situations, it's not blinding down there on the 1 and 2 power. But it's also that brightness is going to really give you the ability to track that center of your crosshair, even when you're quickly trying to lead a moving target. That brightness is it's always going to let you know where it's at. So whether you're holding high and left or right for wind, you're going to be able to make those corrections while you're also tracking a moving target. So I think for those varmint guns, this is also a good option if you're on that tight budget. If you don't have a tight budget, buy something better. I mean, always, if you can buy a better scope, buy a better scope. But if you can't, I think this one is going to be good for those three purposes. I think people are going to be satisfied with it. And then the last thing I want to do is talk about price. What would I say is a good price for this? Given the Black Friday sales, stuff like that, under $150, I would say if it really meets what you want, buy it. If you're real frugal, go online, and you can probably get this thing down there closer to like 125 with the illumination. I was just kind of generally looking around, but $150, you should be able to find it at that price any day of the week. Places like Amazon and Academy Sports and Bass Pro all have it at that price right now as of the time I filmed this video. They may go up or down a little bit throughout the year. It just depends on the holiday and the sales that are going on. You just got to keep your eye out for it. If you don't need illumination, do not pay more than $110 for this scope, whether it's the 50mm or the 40mm objective. If you're looking at the 3 to 9 by magnification, $100 to $110 is your everyday retail price. If you can find one used for under $100, I mean, I don't think it's a bad scope. I think you could do a lot worse, especially when we get to comparing it to a couple of these other ones, even comparing it to the Crossfire. I think it is a better scope than that. We're going to do a side-by-side between these eventually, but just generally speaking, I had an easier time using this scope than the Vortex so far. And that's really all I have to say about this. If you have gotten to this far in the review, thank you. And I hope you hit that subscribe button. And if you have any thoughts on this, if you have any personal experience with it, throw a comment down there in the comment section. let me know what your experience has been with it. If you've had any trouble with it, that would also be good to know, because most of the reviews that you see don't harp on anything. They're just usually positive. So if you have a bad experience, please put it in there so people can have an idea what to look out for. But other than that, again, thank you for watching my video, and I hope to see you in the next one.